Hello and welcome to your 8th grade Battlebots project. How this class is going to be structured is that we will define some of the rules of what the robot competition is going to look like, what you can have for a Battlebot, what you can't have for a Battlebot, what the rules of the actual combat will look like, and then give you some examples on different types of robots that have already existed, different types of battles that have already been publicized and are put out there. You can build the robot basically however you want. There's some restrictions on size, the type of electronics you can use, how the transmission of controller to robot happens, but even within there, you'll have a couple of choices. The first thought is, what does your robot have to actually look like to be within the rule set? And then how do you design it off of that to be able to succeed in a combat robotics situation? A traditional wedge-style robot can kind of look like anything from just this little guy here, which is very simply just a box with a curved radius on its front. A robot will come in going this way, get caught underneath it, and then get flipped on top. This is kind of a little bit more simpler of a version, is just a wedge, cheese wedge, runs up underneath it, robot goes up this way, flips. You can also have an active version of this. An active weapon is anything that requires a motor to be able to move in order to make it work, right? So it has some form of electronic that makes it so that by itself, it doesn't just sit there and do nothing. It literally has something that has to be engaged mechanically or electronically to make it work and function. So in this case, it's a wedge type that has a little flipper on it. The flipper comes up and rotates forward towards the robot, flipping it on its back right underneath it. Cool thing about that is because then this robot could then come in and scoop it without having to turn around anymore. This is also another version where you have a scoop and a little wacky stick here. This wacky stick, as the robot comes up, this wacky stick flicks it and he ends up going flying. Last one on here, same thing. This is kind of like a little lift. So it ends up, the robot gets underneath it and then this part will lift up and flip. So more of the same. Then you have an active robot that goes and primarily is just there to beat the other contestant down. Son of Waiachi is basically the same type as far as flipping, has a little bit here, but its main weapon is these 3 hammers that are positioned around the body of the robot, and they spin right here on this axis. So the primary way that Son of Waiachi has to defend himself is to crank this thing up to start spinning really fast and then smash into the other opponent. Nightmare, on the other hand, has a gigantic buzzsaw right in the front. Basically has no flipper to speak of, but this thing spins really, really fast, and as soon as it headbutts into another robot, it gets shredded by this gigantic buzzsaw on the front. Tombstone, again, has a spinner. This one, instead of being a vertical spinner, has a horizontal spinner. And this horizontal spinner, as soon as it gets in front of it, will smack it to the side, ripping up the robot. There's going to be a couple of different videos that will show you an attachment to this so that you can kind of see what is going on when these BattleBots are actually in a combat situation. All right. So you've had a look at some of the different types of robots that you have and what can be made. Now for a couple of basic rules, just so you can start thinking about what you can't make. There will be no projectiles at all, which means flamethrowers, darts, anything that you water, anything that would project something from your robot outside of your robot
you cannot have. That does not count piston actuated punches. So if I have a thing here that pushes and then punches, as long as it's still retained inside the robot as special bonus points, if it can also retract back, then that is totally allowed. But nothing that actually goes and throws something outside of the robot. The size for the robot will be 1 tile big. So look down at the ground, and 1 tile, that is the size of what you can make for right now. The partners that you'll have will be based off of the design types that you have for your robots, which we'll be going over next class. So today, we're going to show you some videos of different types of combat. The first will be a sumo bot competition. Again, those robots are completely autonomous, which means they have no human interactable controlling. They're just placed on the battlefield, and then they seek each other out, and boosh. That's simple. The person that stays on the platform and is able to move at the end of the timer, or the last person on the actual board itself, wins. The second part that we'll show you will be of regular BattleBots. It's a fairly long video and has a lot of really cool robots going on to it. Some of these robots have some stuff you can't do, such as the flamethrowers mentioned before. But anything else, for the most part, is pretty much okay. You'll have a couple wedges, a couple with saws, a couple with gigantic hammers that actuate down and smash the opponent. Those are all okay for you to do, with varying levels of difficulty on how you actually implement them. All of your robots will be made out of materials that we have within the shop, which includes the motors and the Arduinos and radio controllers. The 3D printer and the laser cutter will be in use, as well as any of the hand tools that we have. The robot cannot be made out of metal, unfortunately. I've tried, I've asked, metal we cannot do. However, wood and 3D printed plastics are perfectly fine. So with that, start thinking about your designs as you're watching these videos. Any other questions you have, let me know next class, and we'll come up with both your pairs and the basic designs that you want to go.